Picture this: you're scrolling through your usual social media feed when suddenly, you stumble upon a photograph that makes you stop dead in your tracks. Your heart skips a beat, and your mind struggles to process what you're seeing. That's exactly what happened to me when I first discovered the hidden collection I'm about to share with you today. Hello, history enthusiasts and curious minds. Today, we're about to embark on an extraordinary journey through time that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. But before we dive in, I need to warn you, some of these photos are so remarkable that you might need to pause the video just to process what you're seeing. And here's the thing, that photo I mentioned? It's number 73 on our list, and trust me, it's going to make you question reality itself. But we'll get to that. All in good time. What if I told you that one of these photographs contains evidence of a technology that shouldn't have existed for another 50 years after it was taken? Or that another captures a moment so impossible, historians spent decades trying to prove it was fake, only to discover it was real all along? Let's start with number 100, and work our way up to the most mind-bending historical photographs ever captured. Each one of these images tells a story that's stranger than fiction, yet absolutely true. In 1895, a simple photograph was taken in a small town in France. At first glance, it appears to be nothing special, just a group of workers leaving a factory. But this ordinary scene would change the course of human history forever. This was the very first motion picture ever filmed by the Lumiere brothers, marking the birth of cinema as we know it. Speaking of firsts, let's jump to number 99. The year is 1826, and Joseph Nicephore Niepce has just created something revolutionary, the world's first photograph. The grainy, barely discernible image shows a view from his window in Burgundy, France. It took 8 hours of exposure time to capture this single shot. Today, we take billions of photos every second. Imagine trying to explain that to Niepce. Number 98 takes us to a rather peculiar moment in 1889. Thomas Edison's assistant, William Kennedy Dixon, created the first film ever made in America. The subject? A man sneezing. Yes, you heard that right. The 5-second clip, known as Fred Sneeze, became a sensation. Think about it, the first American film wasn't a dramatic story or a grand spectacle, but simply a man sneeze. Sometimes, the most mundane moments make the most extraordinary history. For number 97, we're traveling to 1903, where two bicycle mechanics from Ohio are about to change transportation forever. The photograph shows the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk. But here's something most people don't know, the iconic image almost didn't exist. John T. Daniels, who took the photo, had never operated a camera before that day. He was so excited when the plane took off that he almost forgot to squeeze the bulb to take the picture. Talk about pressure. Moving to number 96, we find ourselves in Paris, 1839. Louis Daguerre points his camera toward the Boulevard du Temple, capturing what would become the first photograph to ever include a human being. Due to the long exposure time, the bustling street appears empty except for one man getting his shoes shined. He stood still long enough to be captured, unknowingly becoming the first person ever photographed. Imagine being immortalized in history simply because you needed your shoes polished. Number 95 brings us face to face with Abraham Lincoln, but not the Lincoln you're familiar with. This photograph from 1846 shows him as a young congressman, clean-shaven and without his iconic beard. The story goes that he grew his famous facial hair after receiving a letter from 11-year-old Grace Bettel, who suggested it would help him win the presidency. Sometimes, the smallest suggestions can change the course of history. For number 94, we're looking at what appears to be a normal Victorian-era portrait from 1855. But wait, is that woman smiling? Indeed she is, and that makes this image extraordinary. In the Victorian era, long exposure times meant subjects had to hold their poses for several minutes. Smiling for that long was nearly impossible, which is why most Victorian photographs show serious expressions. This unknown woman must have had incredible facial muscles, or a really great joke to think about. Number 93 takes us to a rather bizarre moment in 1959. During a visit to Moscow, Vice President Richard Nixon and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had what became known as the kitchen debate. The photograph shows them arguing about capitalism versus communism in a model American kitchen at a trade exhibition. Yes, the fate of the Cold War was being discussed over a display refrigerator. Sometimes, world-changing conversations happen in the most unexpected places. Let's pause for a moment, because number 92 is going to need your full attention. The year is 1848, and what you're looking at is the construction of the Washington Monument. But look closely at the bottom right corner. See that group of people? Among them is a young Robert E. Lee, decades before the Civil War would make him infamous. History has a way of hiding these little connections in plain sight. For number 91, we're witnessing something truly remarkable, the last known thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, captured on film in 1933. This footage from the Hobart Zoo shows Benjamin, the last of his species, pacing in his enclosure. Just 3 years later, he would die from exposure after being locked out of his shelter on a cold night. The photograph serves as a haunting reminder of human impact on wildlife. Number 90 brings us to 1942, and a photograph that changed the course of scientific history. This is the first self-sustained nuclear reaction, occurring under the stands of the University of Chicago's abandoned football stadium. The scientists present had no protective gear, just a handheld axe to cut the control ropes if things went wrong. Talk about workplace safety standards. Moving to number 89, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal crowd photograph from 1863. But this image, taken at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, is one of only 2 confirmed photographs of Abraham Lincoln at the event where he delivered his famous Gettysburg Address. He's barely visible in the crowd, proving that even the most significant moments in history can sometimes be hiding in the background. Number 88 shows us something both mundane and revolutionary, the first email ever sent, captured in a screenshot from 1971. The message? Where do you up? Not exactly Mr. Watson, come here, but hey, you have to start somewhere. For number 87, we're looking at what might be the most expensive photographic mistake in history. In 1962, Decca Records photographed a young band auditioning for a record contract. They rejected the band, saying guitar groups are on their way out. That band? The Beatles? The photograph serves as a reminder that even experts can sometimes miss the obvious. Number 86 takes us to a rather peculiar moment in 1975. This is the first digital photograph ever taken, and it's of a Kodak lab technician's baby. The photo took 23 seconds to record and needed a computer the size of a refrigerator to process. Today, we can take and share thousands of photos instantly. Sometimes, progress happens faster than we can imagine. Let's jump to number 85, where we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal street scene from 1938 Hamburg, Germany. But look closer at the crowd, there's one man refusing to give the Nazi salute. His name was August Landmesser, and his act of defiance, captured in this single photograph, has become a powerful symbol of individual resistance against tyranny. Number 84 shows us something that shouldn't exist, a photograph of Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration in 1865. Look closely at the crowd, and you'll spot John Wilkes Booth watching from the periphery. Just 6 weeks later, he would assassinate the president. It's a chilling reminder of how history can hide in plain sight. For number 83, we're looking at what appears to be a simple family portrait from 1900. But this photograph carries an incredible secret, it's the first known example of photo manipulation. The ghost in the background was created by double exposure, proving that fake news isn't just a modern phenomenon. Number 82 brings us to 1969, and one of the most controversial photographs in history, the first footprint on the moon. Conspiracy theorists have spent decades trying to prove it was faked, but here's something they often miss: the boot print is actually Buzz Aldrin's, not Neil Armstrong's. Armstrong was behind the camera, capturing his colleague's step for posterity. Moving to number 81, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal World War I battlefield photograph. But this image captures something extraordinary: the last cavalry charge in Western European military history, taken at Moroi Wood in 1918. It's a powerful reminder of how quickly military technology evolved, making centuries of traditional warfare obsolete in just a few years. Number 80 shows us something both ordinary and revolutionary, the first color photograph ever taken. Created by James Clerk Maxwell in 1861, it's a picture of a tartan ribbon. Not exactly the Mona Lisa, but this humble beginning would eventually lead to the vibrant world of color photography we know today. For number 79, we're looking at what might be the most ironic photograph in history. It shows the iceberg that sank the Titanic, captured by the chief steward of the SS Prince Adalbert on April 15, 1912, just hours after the disaster. He hadn't yet heard about the Titanic's fate when he photographed the iceberg, noting the unusual red paint scrape along its base. Number 78 brings us face to face with history's greatest escape artist, Harry Houdini. But this isn't just any photograph. Taken in 1899, it shows him moments before a stunt went wrong, resulting in his first and only documented failure. Sometimes, even the greatest have their off days. Let's pause for a moment, because number 77 requires your full attention. This photograph from 1848 shows the construction of the Washington Monument, but look closely at the group of workers in the corner. Among them is a young Frederick Douglass, who worked as a laborer on the project before becoming one of America's most important abolitionists. Number 76 takes us to a rather bizarre moment in 1922. This photograph shows the first ever car radio being installed. The antenna alone took up the entire roof of the car, and the equipment filled the entire back seat. The cost? Equivalent to about $23,000 in today's money. Next time you complain about your car's Bluetooth connection, remember this. And now, we've reached number 75, which shows something truly extraordinary, the first photograph ever taken of a tornado. Captured in 1884 by an amateur photographer in South Dakota, the image was initially dismissed as a fake. It took decades for experts to confirm its authenticity, proving that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Number 74 brings us to a powerful moment in 1963. This photograph shows Martin Luther King Jr. delivering his "I Have a Dream" speech, but look closely at the crowd. In the front row, you'll spot a young Bernie Sanders, then a college student. It's a reminder that many of today's leaders were shaped by yesterday's moments. And now, the photograph I mentioned at the beginning, number 73. Taken in 1840, it shows a busy street in New York City. But here's the mind-bending part: in the upper left corner, there's what appears to be a modern traffic light. Of course, it's not actually a traffic light, it's a gas lamp with an unusual design. But this photograph has fooled experts for years, reminding us that sometimes our modern perspective can play tricks on our understanding of the past. Number 72 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary, the first selfie ever taken. Created by Robert Cornelius in 1839, this self-portrait required him to sit still for 15 minutes. Compare that to today's instant selfies. Sometimes, progress is measured in minutes saved. Moving to number 71, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal crowd photograph from 1962. But this image captures something remarkable: the first time the Rolling Stones and the Beatles met, at a small club in London. Neither band knew they would become legendary, making this chance encounter even more fascinating. Number 70 brings us to a rather peculiar moment in 1903. This photograph shows the first speeding ticket ever issued, to a person driving 8 miles per hour in a 2 miles per hour zone. The driver's excuse? "I'm late for lunch." Some things never change. For number 69, we're looking at what might be the most prophetic photograph in history. Taken in 1900, it shows a group of experts predicting what the year 2000 would look like. Among their predictions, video calls, home delivery services, and electric cars. Sometimes, the past can see the future more clearly than we expect. Number 68 takes us to a powerful moment in 1955. This photograph shows Rosa Parks being fingerprinted after her arrest, but look closely at her expression. There's no fear, no anger, just quiet determination. It's a reminder that the most powerful moments in history often come from simple acts of courage. Moving to number 67, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal beach scene from 1922. But this photograph captures something revolutionary: the arrest of a woman for wearing a revealing bathing suit. The crime? Her knees were showing. Sometimes, progress can be measured in inches of fabric. Number 66 brings us face to face with the first photograph ever taken of lightning. Captured in 1882, it required incredibly precise timing and more than a little luck. The photographer, William Jennings, spent months trying to capture this shot. Talk about dedication to the craft. For number 65, we're looking at what might be the most expensive mistake in art history. This 1874 photograph shows Claude Monet's impression, Sunrise, being rejected from a prestigious art show. The painting that launched Impressionism was dismissed as unfinished. Sometimes, what looks like failure is actually innovation in disguise. Number 64 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary: the first photograph ever taken of a presidential inauguration. The year is 1857, and James Buchanan is taking the oath of office. The photograph is blurry, the exposure is off, but it marks the beginning of documenting America's peaceful transfer of power. Moving to number 63, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal street scene from 1938. But this photograph captures something remarkable: the first automatic parking meter being installed in Oklahoma City. The inventor's inspiration? A device used to time eggs boiling. Sometimes, innovation comes from the most unexpected places. Number 62 brings us to a rather bizarre moment in 1916. This photograph shows a group of people wearing anti-flu masks during the Spanish flu pandemic. But look closely, some of the masks have holes cut in them for smoking. Sometimes, human nature doesn't change, even in a crisis. For number 61, we're looking at what might be the most ironic photograph in advertising history. Taken in 1916, it shows the Kodak company declaring that digital photography will never catch on. Sometimes, the future arrives whether we're ready or not. Number 60 shows us something truly extraordinary: the first photograph ever taken of the Earth from space. Captured in 1946 from a V-2 rocket, this grainy black and white image changed our perspective of our planet forever. Sometimes, we need to step back to see the bigger picture. Moving to number 59, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal classroom photograph from 1952. But among the students is a young Stephen Hawking, already showing signs of his brilliant mind by correcting his teacher's mathematics on the blackboard. Number 58 brings us to a powerful moment in 1963. This photograph shows the last prisoner leaving Alcatraz Island after the prison's closure. His parting words? Good riddance to bad rubbish. Sometimes, the end of an era can be summed up in a single sentence. For number 57, we're looking at what might be the most prophetic advertisement in history. Published in 1953, it shows a home computer concept that looks remarkably similar to today's smart home systems. The prediction was off by a few decades, but the vision was surprisingly accurate. Number 56 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary: the first photograph ever taken underwater. Captured in 1856 by William Thompson, it shows, well, mostly murky water. But this humble beginning would eventually lead to the spectacular underwater photography we know today. Moving to number 55, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal crowd photograph from 1969. But this image captures the exact moment when Paul McCartney walked across Abbey Road barefoot, sparking decades of Paul is dead conspiracy theories. Sometimes, the smallest details can create the biggest mysteries. Number 54 brings us to a rather peculiar moment in 1913. This photograph shows the last known passenger pigeon, Martha, in her cage at the Cincinnati Zoo. Just a century earlier, these birds numbered in the billions. Martha's lonely portrait serves as a stark reminder of how quickly a species can vanish. For number 53, we're looking at what might be the first photobomb in history. Taken in 1853 during a daguerreotype portrait session, it shows a gentleman being accidentally interrupted by a cat that jumped onto his lap mid-exposure. Even in the formal Victorian era, cats were still cats. Number 52 takes us to a powerful moment in 1945. This photograph shows the USS Missouri's deck during Japan's surrender ceremony ending World War II. But look closely at the corner, you'll spot a sailor's pet monkey wearing a miniature naval uniform. Even in history's most solemn moments, humanity's lighter side finds a way to peek through. Moving to number 51, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal street scene from 1928. But this photograph captures the first ever demonstration of television broadcasting, transmitted from one building to another in New York City. The image quality was terrible, but it marked the beginning of a revolution in communication. Number 50. We're halfway through our journey, and this one's special. This photograph from 1878 shows a horse in motion, settling a long-standing debate about whether all four hooves leave the ground during a gallop. Photographer Edward Muybridge used multiple cameras triggered by tripwires to capture this sequence, essentially creating the world's first motion picture. For number 49, we're looking at what appears to be a simple portrait from 1844. But this is actually the first photograph ever taken of a U.S. president, John Quincy Adams. The former president's reaction to seeing himself? The photograph is a horrid-looking thing. Some critics are never satisfied. Number 48 brings us to a rather bizarre moment in 1957. This photograph shows the first ever McDonald's drive-thru being installed. The reason? Local military base regulations prevented soldiers from leaving their vehicles while in uniform. Sometimes, innovation comes from the most unexpected restrictions. Moving to number 47, we have what might be the most expensive lunch break in history. This photograph from 1932 shows construction workers casually eating lunch while perched on a steel beam 850 feet above New York City. No safety harnesses, no guardrails, just sandwiches and nerves of steel. For number 46, we're witnessing something truly remarkable, the last commercial telegram ever sent in the United States, in 2006. The message? Stop. End of ERA. Stop. Sometimes, endings write themselves. Number 45 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary, the first photograph ever taken of a solar eclipse. Captured in 1851, it required precise timing and specialized equipment. The photographer, Burkowski, had just one chance to get it right. Talk about pressure. Let's pause for number 44, because this one's particularly fascinating. This photograph from 1884 shows the first graduates of MIT's electrical engineering program. Among them is Alexander Graham Bell, but look closely at his thesis project in the corner, it's an early prototype of what would become the telephone. Number 43 brings us to a powerful moment in 1989. This photograph shows a lone protester standing in front of a column of tanks in Tiananmen Square. But here's something most people don't know. This wasn't the first photo taken of the scene. The first photographer's film was confiscated, making this second attempt even more remarkable. For number 42, we're looking at what might be the most prophetic failure in business history. This 1959 photograph shows IBM rejecting the concept of personal computers as too risky. Sometimes, the biggest opportunities look like the biggest risks. Moving to number 41, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal family photograph from 1901. But among the children is a young Walt Disney, already showing his artistic talent by drawing cartoons in the margins of his school books. Sometimes, genius reveals itself early. Number 40 shows us something truly extraordinary, the first photograph ever taken of a presidential inauguration speech. The year is 1857, and James Buchanan is addressing the nation. The exposure took so long that the crowd appears as a blur, but Buchanan had to stand perfectly still to remain in focus. For number 39, we're looking at what might be the most ironic photograph in sports history. Taken in 1919, it shows the moment the Boston Red Sox traded Babe Ruth to the Yankees for $100,000. The curse of the Bambino would last 86 years. Number 38 brings us to a rather bizarre moment in 1902. This photograph shows the first speeding ticket ever issued in Britain, to a motorist going 8 miles per hour in a 2 miles per hour zone. His defense? He claimed his car couldn't possibly go that fast. Some excuses never change. Moving to number 37, we have what appears to be a normal street scene from 1928. But this photograph captures something revolutionary: the first traffic light in America. The inventor, Garrett Morgan, was inspired after witnessing a terrible collision between a horse-drawn carriage and an automobile. For number 36, we're witnessing something truly remarkable: the first photograph ever taken of a presidential funeral. This 1865 image shows Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession in New York City. The photographer had to use multiple cameras to capture the entire scene, creating what might be considered America's first panoramic photograph. Number 35 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary: the first photograph ever taken of a storm cloud. Captured in 1857, it required the photographer to balance on a rooftop during a thunderstorm. Sometimes, getting the perfect shot requires a bit of madness. Let's pause for number 34, because this one's particularly mind-bending. This photograph from 1899 shows Mark Twain visiting Nikola Tesla's laboratory. Two giants of their respective fields, captured in a single frame. The conversation they had that day? Lost to history, unfortunately. Number 33 brings us to a powerful moment in 1912. This photograph shows the last known survivor of the American Revolution, Daniel F. Bateman, at age 109. He lived long enough to see photography invented and to have his image captured for posterity. Talk about spanning history. For number 32, we're looking at what might be the most expensive mistake in business history. This 1975 photograph shows the founders of Microsoft offering to sell their company to IBM for $50,000. IBM declined. Sometimes, the best deals are the ones you don't make. Moving to number 31, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal laboratory photograph from 1928. But this image captures Alexander Fleming noticing something unusual in one of his petri dishes, the first observation of penicillin. Sometimes, the biggest discoveries happen by accident. Number 30 shows us something truly extraordinary: the first photograph ever taken of a presidential debate. The year is 1960, and John F. Kennedy is squaring off against Richard Nixon in the first televised presidential debate. But here's the interesting part: radio listeners thought Nixon won, while television viewers favored Kennedy. Sometimes, the medium really is the message. For number 29, we're looking at what might be the most prophetic photograph in scientific history. Taken in 1927, it shows Albert Einstein writing his famous equation E=mc² on a blackboard. But look closely at the corner, there's a small diagram that would later become crucial to the development of quantum mechanics. Number 28 brings us to a rather bizarre moment in 1925. This photograph shows the first demonstration of remote-controlled television. The inventor, Charles Francis Jenkins, used it to show his wife what he was cooking for dinner. Sometimes, the future arrives in the most domestic ways. Moving to number 27, we have what appears to be a normal group photograph from 1943. But among the scientists working on the Manhattan Project is a young Richard Feynman, already known for his practical jokes. In this photo, he's actually made a face at the camera, though you can barely tell due to the long exposure time. For number 26, we're witnessing something truly remarkable: the first photograph ever taken of lightning striking a building. Captured in 1884, it required the photographer to leave his camera shutter open during a thunderstorm and hope for the best. Sometimes, luck is as important as skill. Let's take a breath here, because number 25 is particularly special. This photograph from 1897 shows the first Boston Marathon. Only 15 runners participated, and the winner completed the race in just under 3 hours. Today, thousands compete annually, but this humble beginning changed the face of long-distance running forever. Number 24 brings us to a remarkable moment in 1888. This photograph captures Vincent van Gogh's only confirmed photographic portrait. The artist famously disliked photography, believing it couldn't capture the soul like painting could. The irony? This photograph has helped art historians understand his self-portraits better than any other historical document. For number 23, we're looking at what might be the most fortuitous accident in photographic history. In 1905, The Lumiere brothers accidentally created the first color photograph while experimenting with potato starch. Sometimes, the biggest breakthroughs come from the most unlikely ingredients. Number 22 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary, the first photograph ever taken of a U.S. Supreme Court session. Captured secretly in 1932 by a reporter who smuggled in a camera in his shoe, this grainy image would lead to the complete ban of cameras in the Supreme Court that persists to this day. Moving to number 21, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal classroom photograph from 1951. But among the students is a young James Watson, who would later co-discover the structure of DNA. His notebook shows early sketches of what would become the double helix model. Number 20 brings us to a pivotal moment in 1944. This photograph shows the first computer bug, literally. Grace Hopper found a moth trapped in the Harvard Mark II computer and taped it to the log book with the note "First actual case of bug being found." And that's why we call computer problems bugs today. For number 19, we're witnessing something truly remarkable, the first photograph ever taken of a volcanic eruption. Captured in 1872 at Mount Vesuvius, the photographer had to coat his plates while dodging falling ash and debris. Talk about dedication to the craft. Number 18 takes us to a rather peculiar moment in 1930. This photograph shows the first television commercial ever broadcast. The product being advertised? A watch that cost $1. The total viewing audience? 28 people. Sometimes, the biggest revolutions start small. Moving to number 17, we have what might be the most expensive game of chess in history. This 1946 photograph shows the ENIAC computer being programmed to play chess, a task that cost millions in today's money. The computer could see 4 moves ahead, while today's smartphones can see 20 or more. For number 16, we're looking at what appears to be a normal street scene from 1923. But this photograph captures the first demonstration of parallel parking. The inventor, a woman named Amy Beach, was told parking was too complicated for female drivers. She responded by inventing a method that's still taught today. Number 15 shows us something truly extraordinary, the first photograph ever taken of a solar system object beyond Saturn. The discovery of Uranus was captured in this 1781 image, though the photographer thought he was documenting a comet. Sometimes, the biggest discoveries come with a case of mistaken identity. Let's pause for number 14, because this one's particularly fascinating. This photograph from 1876 shows Alexander Graham Bell making the first long-distance telephone call. But look closely at his assistant's expression. He's clearly trying not to laugh because Bell had just accidentally spilled acid on his trousers. Number 13 brings us to a powerful moment in 1903. This photograph shows Marie Curie in her laboratory, surrounded by glowing vials of radium. The image was captured on a photographic plate that had no exposure to light. The radium's radiation created the image itself. Science doesn't get much more meta than that. For number 12, we're looking at what might be the most prophetic patent drawing in history. This 1895 sketch shows Nikola Tesla's design for worldwide wireless communication. Over a century later, we call it Wi-Fi. Sometimes, visionaries see so far ahead that the world needs decades to catch up. Moving to number 11, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a normal family photograph from 1919. But among the children is a young Werner Heisenberg, already showing his uncertainty about having his picture taken. A little quantum mechanics humor there, folks. And now we're entering the top 10. Number 10 shows us something both ordinary and extraordinary, the first photograph ever taken of sound waves. Captured in 1876, it shows ripples in a soap film caused by sound vibrations. This simple experiment would later lead to the development of modern acoustics. Number 9 takes us to a pivotal moment in space exploration. This 1946 photograph shows the first view of Earth from space, taken from a V-2 rocket at an altitude of 65 miles. The grainy black and white image changed our perspective of our planet forever. The scientists who developed the camera reportedly wept when they saw the image. For number 8, we're looking at what might be the most significant accident in medical history. This 1928 photograph shows Alexander Fleming examining the moldy petri dish that would lead to the discovery of penicillin. The spores had drifted in through an open window, a fortunate mistake that would save millions of lives. Number 7 brings us to a remarkable moment in 1900. This photograph shows Nikola Tesla sitting calmly in his laboratory, surrounded by millions of volts of artificial lightning. The exposure time was a mere 1/100th of a second, captured through a revolutionary technique Tesla himself developed. Moving to number 6, we find ourselves looking at what appears to be a simple portrait from 1839. This is the first photograph ever taken that shows a human face. The subject, Robert Cornelius, had to sit motionless for 15 minutes to capture the image. His expression of slight discomfort is perfectly understandable. Number 5 shows us something truly extraordinary, the first photograph of the moon's surface showing clear detail. Taken in 1840 by John William Draper, this daguerreotype required an exposure time of 20 minutes and a telescope that Draper built himself. The image quality may seem poor by today's standards, but at the time, it was nothing short of miraculous. For number 4, we have what might be the most important scientific photograph ever taken. This 1953 image, known as Photo 51, was captured by Rosalind Franklin and revealed the double helix structure of DNA. The photograph was shown to Watson and Crick without Franklin's knowledge, leading to their famous discovery, and decades of controversy. Number 3 brings us to an astonishing moment in 1878. This photograph by Edward Muybridge definitively proved that horses lift all 4 hooves off the ground while galloping. The governor of California had bet $25,000 on this question, and Muybridge used an array of 24 cameras to settle the debate. This study would later become the foundation of motion pictures. Number 2 takes us to a truly mind-bending moment in 1927. This photograph shows the participants of the 5th Solvay Conference, the most intelligent photograph ever taken. In this single frame, we see Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, Niels Bohr, and Werner Heisenberg, among others. Together, these scientists held 17 Nobel Prizes, and their theories would shape the 20th century. And finally, we've reached number 1, the photograph that changed everything. Taken in 1826 by Joseph Nicephore Niepce, view from the window at Le Gras is the oldest surviving photograph in existence. The exposure time was 8 hours, and the image is barely recognizable to modern eyes. But this grainy, indistinct view of a French courtyard marked the beginning of a revolution that continues to this day. Every selfie, every Instagram post, every family photo, and every historical moment captured on camera traces its lineage back to this single image. Looking back at these 100 photographs, we see more than just moments frozen in time. We see the evolution of human ingenuity, the capture of pivotal moments that shaped our world, and the preservation of memories that might otherwise have been lost to history. Each image tells a story, challenges our assumptions, and reminds us that the past is always more complex and fascinating than we imagine. And remember that photograph I mentioned at the beginning, number 73, with its seemingly impossible traffic light. It serves as a perfect metaphor for how we view history. Sometimes, what appears modern to our eyes is actually ancient, and what seems ancient might be surprisingly modern. These photographs don't just show us the past, they show us how our perspective of the past continues to evolve. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Remember, every photograph you take today might be tomorrow's historical artifact. So keep clicking, keep capturing, and keep contributing to the visual history of our world. Until next time, stay curious, my friends.